8. On our panel, we have Mr. S. Ramann, the Chairman and Managing Director of Small Industries Development Bank of India, SIDBI, which is the principal financial institution engaged in the promotion, financing and development of micro, small and medium enterprises. At SIDBI, he has been attempting to promote governance with growth in an effort to carve out a legitimate place for the MSME sector. Prior to this, Mr. Ramann was the Managing Director and CEO of the National E-Governance Services, India's first information utility. An Indian Audit and Accounts Service Officer, Mr. Ramann has held the position of Principal Accountant General of State of Jharkhand and was the Executive Director with SEBI. Dr. Santrupt Misra is the Group Director, Birla Carbon, Director Chemicals and Director Group Human Resources for the Aditya Birla Group, a global Indian conglomerate. A business leader and an HR professional of standing with over 3 decades of experience in global business leadership, corporate governance, organizational transformation, non-profit leadership, and professional development. Dr. Misra serves on the boards of several large companies, and he has recently been appointed as a director on the board of Karma Yogi Bharat, or Mission Karma Yogi. He has been instrumental in developing a strong employer brand for the Aditya Birla Group, and he will also moderate this discussion. Mr. Alok Choudhary, our third member on the panel, is the Managing Director of State Bank of India and has work experience across multiple domains, including retail banking, commercial banking, MSME, agri and rural businesses, branch management, human resources and finance. He's a seasoned banker with over 35 years of experience in various leadership and functional capacities at branches, regional offices, zonal offices, local head offices, and corporate office level. As head of SBI's Delhi Circle, he implemented the merger of associate bank branches. So if I could request Dr. Misra to please steer the discussion now.
Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be here and particularly to share the dais with 2 very distinguished colleagues on both my sides, Mr. Choudhary and Mr. Ramann. And I don't know whether it's the chill of good or bad governance. I can feel the chill literally from top. I hope my panelists do too. I've been a self-appointed fan of Mr. Damodaran for a long time, who combines seriousness of the subject governance with a lot of lightheartedness. And I was coming here today, and I often have heard Mr. Damodaran being inspired by Bollywood in many of his observations. So I was asking myself that even though governance is a serious subject, I don't have to be serious right through it. I was asking myself, is there a connection between Bollywood and governance? Then the only thing, Mr. Damodaran, I could find was that apparently in Hindi movies, there have often been films with the letter K that have done well, you know, called Karishma Kudrat Ka, Khatron Ka Khiladi and many things like that. And suddenly I found that governance also has benefited from the word K. King Committee report, Kumar Mangalam report, Kotak report. So that's the only connection between Bollywood and governance I could find perhaps. But we have a very interesting subject because for a long time we all have believed that governance has been a domain of large companies. And those of you, and I'm a bit in awe of the audience, many people I know in the audience, many of whom I have deep respect for from my personal knowledge. So I'm just thinking, as I make my observations very carefully, that if you look at the governance regulations, including Companies Act, you suddenly find that many regulation stipulations are meant for companies of a certain size, whether it is a CSR committee or whether it is the sustainability reporting, it is NRC formation. Many other stipulations in governance and regulations related to that are connected to size. But also, simultaneously, we know that MSMEs, as we call them, small and medium enterprises, even if I leave aside the micro enterprises, constitute the mainstay of many global economies, particularly in emerging markets, in terms of contribution to GDP and employment creation. So we have a very, very interesting subject today to discuss, that is or does governance have to be the preserve of large corporations, be it in terms of market capitalization, net worth, revenue and whatnot, as we see in regulation from time to time, Or is there a relevance of that in the context of small and medium enterprises? So I would invite Mr. Choudhary perhaps for his opening comments on the broad subject, saying, does governance as a concept have any relevance for small and medium enterprises?
Yeah, so good morning to all of you. It's a difficult question, don't have a cookie cutter explanation and straight explanation for this. But we're around 3.5 decades of experience in dealing with the small to large organizations. I can attempt an answer to this. So when you talk of corporate governance as a notion and as a concept, suddenly something comes to mind: your board, ownership, composition of the board, meetings, processes, independent directors, audit committee, NRC, and things like that suddenly come to mind, and the disclosures, of course. Now, all these have a cost. So when I'm a small scale entrepreneur or a small organization, I'm looking at my P&L every day, so every pie counts to me, and then try to multitask and then get productivity out of each money I spend. And so I can say that, well, I don't need it, I don't have any incentive, I don't have any wherewithal for that, and more so when I don't have shareholders, so as many people say, why go the extra mile? But this line of argument sounds to me something like saying that, well, technology is for big companies, it's not for me. But as we can see, it has become all pervasive, starting from a pawn shop to the highest authority. You have apps and MIS generating situations. So from that perspective, we just tweak a little this question that whether the corporate governance practices are needed in the small scale organizations, then you have a very interesting answer. So see, the fundamental tenets of transparency, accountability, and safety of the entire enterprise, so to say, that is required whether you are small or big. So from that perspective, because the drivers of growth of a small scale or medium scale organization, as well as the pulleys of control of that kind of organization, is entirely different. So these are needed, but the question which comes to mind is what sort of corporate governance is needed. So we require the elaborate paraphernalia and structure, or we require the basic tenets of an organization. So to my mind, I think it's not size dependent. Of course, the paraphernalia will be different. And just to get a very beautiful simile out of it, you require chromosomes in individuals, right, in all human beings. So if you are a fruit fly, Drosophila, you require 8 chromosomes. If you are a radish or a garlic or a kangaroo, you require probably 16 chromosomes. If you are a human being, you require, say, 46 chromosomes. So chromosomes you require, the number of chromosomes can be different. So similarly, corporate governance practices you require, the body of corporate governance, it could be entirely different depending upon your size, structure, strategy, functions, and overall the people's involvement in a particular enterprise. So this is what I would like to attempt as an answer.
Thanks so much, Jim. Mr. Choudhary's introduction, perhaps it was not mentioned that he was a student of science, but with his analogy of chromosomes, he well established he did study science sometime, you know. So let me turn to Mr. Ramann. You know, Mr. Ramann, this is a very interesting problem that you are the principal financial institution that is tasked with the job of financing, promoting, developing the MSME sector. And of course, the effort of government of India to promote MSME sector has taken many different hues over a period of time. Now, as someone who's at the head of such an institution, when you look at MSME, would you say that governance or lack of governance or governance deficit is one of the key factors holding back the growth of the sector, MSME sector in India, compared to all other factors that we generally think about?
So thank you and a very good morning, and thank you so much, Mr. Damodaran, for inviting me here. It's certainly an honor to be here, and Dr. Santrupt Misra is somebody who I heard 10 years ago, and it still rings in my mind as the wonderful way that he narrates things and explains things. So it's a good panel to be on. So let me try and get to the core of why do we need governance, and honestly I would equate it with public interest. So if you took government at one level, which has nothing but public interest imbued all over it at any point of time, and therefore you need a plethora of institutions that are going to ensure good governance. So be it the Supreme Courts, be it the C&AG, be it whoever it is, there are many institutions that are created and enriched in order to ensure that governance is being served. When you look at the other end of the spectrum, and therefore one comes directly into the concept of the small and medium, as you correctly said, the micro is a very, very difficult animal to even start describing. But even if I were to take it as a single group of MSME, where does the public interest lie? And that is really, the question we need to continuously ask ourselves, because that will lead to the answer of, or a solution of, how much do we want to interfere in the working of a particular business entity. So as Mr. Choudhary correctly said, I mean, a business entity at the smallest of levels is just interested in its survival and looking at things more from a weekly or a monthly perspective. In fact, I was in a conference in Asia just last week, where very honestly people were talking about it in an international forum, that small businesses have 3 profit and loss accounts. So it's not something that is there alone in India. Across the board, I think everybody has one profit and loss for the tax man, one for putting out to the customers, and of course there was a nice quip which somebody gave, that one profit and loss account is for the wife. Now, in a family concern, the concept of governance is probably built into the family itself. In the family, we expect somebody to be looking at, are you doing things correctly or not? So it's a very complex relationship of governance with MSME. And I think where we need to go is really about, can we do non-intrusive, more fundamental solutions that encourage MSMEs towards creating a fair and transparent balance sheet. So from a banker's perspective, I think a lot of very good governance comes into an MSME the minute they get a loan from a bank. I mean, it's but natural that he wants the loan and therefore will submit to many things that the bank asks for. I think that itself is a great first step towards governance. So I think what we really have to do is get away from the whole concept of the board and the committees of the board, which obviously one is a corporate requirement. Many MSMEs are just business entities, they're not even corporates. But I would still say that being a non-corporate business entity, governance still is very important. How to infuse that entity with governance is really, I think, the challenge we need to address and put before ourselves.
Thank you so much. I know there's a live streaming going on, so I presume a lot of MSME colleagues would be watching what you both are saying with keen interest. You brought in the angle of public interest. That takes me to more brass tacks and specifics. Let me start with you and then come back to Mr. Choudhary. If 2 promoters walk in today and ask just now, Mr. Ramann, tell me, by having good governance practice, how am I likely to benefit or my business likely to benefit? And can you give me the benefit of that, citing a couple of examples? What would your answer be? I'll start with you and then go to Mr. Choudhary.
Great question. In fact, I'll try and exemplify it. I went to Pune a couple of months ago, met some of our customers, and our customers are typically what I would call the small and medium sector when we do our direct lending. We do a lot of ecosystem building, which requires us to work with a plethora of micro also. We also have a micro lending program, but let me not go there. But I did ask 3 of them. They're all engineering units in Pune, probably making fairly similar products. I asked them that why is it that you will not invest in something which reduces your carbon footprint? I mean, it was a larger ESG issue. And his simple answer was that, why will I invest that money? Because I don't see an immediate return. So from an MSME point of view, it is, and I think this holds good even for a large corporate, that the minute you start seeing a return on investment, you will start making that investment. So what we really need to do is allow for the large corporates to enforce upon their smaller ancillary units the need for governance. It's already happening on the E part of ESG. Why is it that we're not looking at the G part? Now, whether it be a stakeholder, that is a buyer, or a banker, which is giving finance, I think everybody is interested in making sure that the reporting by that particular entity is what it actually is on the ground. Let's keep aside the 3 profit and loss statements. But how do we sort of incentivize them to move to what we call as better governance practices? So the answer really at that point of time to these entities was, maybe you will end up getting more buyers, but honestly they were quite happy with their particular set of supply chain that they were working in. They were really not looking at exports. Now the moment you start talking exports, you're opening up yourself to many more questions from a wider perspective of how buyers internationally would look at you. For them, the E part is probably as important as the S and the G. We really have to, therefore, get the financial incentive built into the corporate governance structure or the governance structure. And I think by doing so, a simple point came to mind right there and then was, can I give you 50 basis points less on your interest rates if I see that you are maintaining a particular standard? Now the question is, what is that standard?
That's interesting. You preempted one of my subsequent questions I thought about. You're talking about building an incentive structure. But before I went to Mr. Choudhary, one other question. I heard your speech in September, I think in ASSOCHAM or somewhere, you referred to India having 9 crore MSME, 1.5 crore registered under the GST, etc. But this benefit story that you talked about, how do you, as a organization responsible for development of the sector, how do you take that message to 9 crore MSME spread all over India?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer for that, but what we are doing, and I think that's really something I would like to share in this very august audience, is that 9 crore figure is really including the entire retail sector. So, literature shows that it's 6.3 crore entities, but when the MSME definition moved ahead and then included all of retail, it's sort of closer to 9. One way of making sure that there is standardization is the whole concept of registration under the Udyam. Now, Udyam number was something that was started at least 4 or 5 years ago, but what today now they have got is a far more robust system of validating the data of a particular business entity. So, Udyam registration is not just a one-time registration, actually it is a flow where on an annual or a biannual basis, depending on certain conditions, there will be the need for validating the data of a particular entity. I think that's one of the best ways of bringing in governance. Now, from a banker's perspective, the Udyam number is very useful because then it classifies as a priority sector loan. So already I think what we're doing is building in this great financial incentive where we're telling the MSME, come and get registered, you will become PSL, it's easier for you to get a loan from a bank, and that process of Udyam registration being a continuous one will then probably lead them towards maintaining certain aspects of governance. And that's really where I feel that what SIDBI is now doing with the Ministry of MSME is creating a much wider platform so that as many of those 9 crores can come in onto the Udyam registration process. It's going to probably take 3 years, but at least that journey has begun.
Thanks so much. Mr. Choudhary, you've been a career banker.
Yeah.
I read about you having grown in Delhi, doing various mergers. And at different stages of your career, obviously, you would have interacted with MSME or, borrowers at different sizes, levels, and perhaps you have refined an earthy way of connecting with them. Now, if they ask you the same question, show me the benefit of governance for my size of the organization. Show me some concrete examples. What do you answer?
This is an eternal question when you enter into an negotiation. What is there in for me? So it's something like that. Now, my counter question to my friend which will come in contact with me is whether you want to remain where you are or you want to move ahead. Move ahead vertically or horizontally, that's a different question. So, when you start to grow, and growth is a basic instinct of any organization. So, you require partnerships, you require ecosystems, you require capital, talent, buyers, etc., etc. The moment you require that, then the basic concept of trust and assurance comes in. Because I want to have relations with you only when I have a belief that you do things right or I will not be cheated. So the first benefit as a small scale industry will be that in your journey for growth, which you can't avoid because you want to increase your sales. So that will be the first thing, that you will attract people, you will attract capital. And the moment you get capital of public at large, whether in partnership or in equity or whatever, then it becomes a public property. And so at that moment of time, you require the processes to be straight, decisions documented, risk managed, ring fenced, everything. And so which is why it is required that you slowly start the journey of corporate governance. Of course, I'll not sort of scare him with all those terms, but the basic things of transparency, maintenance of accounts, tax compliance, say compliance of labor laws, etc., that will be required. So that is something which surely will make him think over this issue. Number two, you also need to sort of give illustrations as to how it has been helped. So while I was saying that, a couple of incidents which I can just relate to you. I was in Ahmedabad and there are a good number of pharmaceutical units there, right? So we had a couple of units and they were all talking to us for 100 crore or 50 crore kind of loans. And I had personally visited those units and tried to understand their all those processes, you know. But meanwhile, I saw a group of Japanese people, they were also sitting in a room. Then I asked, who are they and why are they? No, they are also evaluating our company, they are looking at our systems. And so while we had sanctioned the loan, immediately that person came, sorry sir, they have already invested 300 crores in our as a private equity. Similarly, we had another unit who we had started from a 10 crore loan. They were at around 150. And then one day they came, sir, we want to sort of liquidate our loans. So what happened? No, we had a private equity. Now, when you also relate these kinds of stories which are real, verifiable and can be validated, then both the things arise. Your need for growth and the flow of events which will happen, plus real life examples that it's possible to get capital at lower rates of interest and also get, say, research support, that will surely pull people or pull my customer to the corporate governance journey. So this is what I would like to...
This is interesting, you know, both of you interact with so many MSMEs in your official capacity. Both are large institutions. One is very focused on a particular purpose. Have you ever systematically asked MSMEs, promoters, about their attitude to governance? Have you ever systematically studied it? If not, why not? And as a rising out of this discussion today, are you likely to go back and more systematically study the promoters and MSMEs' attitude towards governance? That's question number one. A related question to that is, if I talk to many MSMEs, their owners, promoters would say, well, we interact with large corporations. A lot of the time, the bad governance actually we learn from them because they abuse their position to push my prices down, don't pay me on time, ask me to do this and that, push me hard to take material back whenever they have a recession. Now, all of these ethical principles or lack of it, I learned from big corporations. So in promoting this good governance culture for MSMEs, what's the role these large big brothers, the kind of role they have to play? So two parts to my question.
Yeah, so coming to the first part of what is the attitude towards that?
Correct. Systematic study of
systematic attitude. Yeah, so it all starts with personal interaction, because if I don't know you, you don't know me, then probably you will show me your drawing room, you will not show me your bedroom and kitchen and all these things. So whenever somebody comes, he will surely try to profess about his commitment to the principles of governance, his commitment towards honesty, his commitment towards transparency and things like that, because this appears to be an easy part. But as bankers, when you sort of develop a corporate memory, when you have seen all kinds of apples at different stages of their impairment or goodness, then we finally say that the test of the pudding is in eating it. So the moment a unit starts behaving in terms of compliance with the terms and conditions which are set by the bank after underwriting, and when you visit a company, he doesn't give you excuses, he shows whatever you require. And then there is also a general understanding in the market community, a sense that this particular unit is doing well. But you also find people that they will profess, they will do everything, take your assistance, but then they will bring certain things which suddenly they say that, oh, this was not known to us and the unit failed. So at that point of time, I think that attitude converted into reality is something which you only know after dealing with him. It can't be known beforehand. So that is, and that is why I think that the person part or in any credit decision which you take, we really emphasize on the person part, getting to know about him from different sources, as well as the different footprints which he has on the digital space. As far as the say comparison with the bad apples in the industry, so to say, I think it's more of wailing. It's more of anger, frustration, wailing, and saying that I could have also done like that. But generally the sense prevails, and all of us don't start firing people or committing crimes because it's all pervasive. So these people, they may wail and they may try to say that no, I have learned from them. But this is more of saying and really doesn't impact the DNA of the person, because primarily corporate governance or ethics is a personal choice. You may have huge organizations. We have history replete with organizations, with professionals coming from all kinds of spaces. But if the top man of the organization, who really, who is really responsible for it, if his personal ethical framework and choices are not strong, frameworks don't help. This is my personal sort of view. And so that is why a person serves the society and society serves the person. So it's both, it goes hand in hand.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Ramann?
Yeah, so, whether it's large
or... You hear such stories a lot more,
No, I think whether it's large or small, at the end of the day, it's really the money in the bank. I think that is the absolute truth, which I think all of us sitting here fully understand and appreciate. So, it is very difficult to start teaching a small business new tricks just because, it's good for a large corporate. Now, as you very correctly said, the large corporate has its own sort of, dirty tricks department. Now, what they do, how they do, we do know about it. They interact with the smaller MSMEs in the supply chain, and certainly those practices will go down. So, much as you're saying that the bad practices do go down, I think we as a society, as an enlightened society, have to bring from the large corporates the drilling down of the good practices. So I think that's really where we have to start, because it's very difficult for, maybe the government or maybe the regulators to start imposing upon the system which is driven by commerce. So finally, it is really for the large corporates to bring in the better practices, and I think the large corporates have to do that because their boards can be questioned saying, have you done this? So that is really the way it probably will flow, and it's an easier way for it to flow. It's probably more cost effective to make it happen, top driven. On surveys, I think your question is great, and I was just relating it to what we did. It's not really a corporate governance survey, but 2 months ago we launched with Dun & Bradstreet a sustainability perception index. Right. And we're taking this to all the large clusters. So we started at Coimbatore and then went to Faridabad. Now all we're asking is a set of about 10 to 12 questions which are focused on sustainability. Now, in that, corporate governance was not featuring. I'm taking this away from what you're saying, and I'm going to now sort of infuse that bit into this particular index. And what we really would like to do is get a much larger awareness amongst the clusters. So you have about 300 odd clusters in the country. So even if we manage to get to 100 clusters, we'll be good. So questions related to sustainability is really what we want to bring to the focus of these people. And over a period of time, you will then be able to get a measure of what they think is sustainable practices. So I think it makes a lot of sense to bring in the corporate governance aspect also into this. We have to try and do this in multiple different ways. So, one is the, sort of top-down approach from the large stakeholders and the buyers, and two is really from, our, not that SIDBI is a regulator, but it's a, sort of ecosystem builder. Just one more point, and it's a very touchy topic for all the MSMEs, is the delayed payments. I'm so happy that you brought it out, even though you did not probably intend to.
No, I intended to. It was a very deliberate statement, yeah.
So, it is really the bane of the MSME system, and we have launched the TREADS platform, and the TREADS platform was designed to quicken the pace of payments to MSMEs. So it is a buyer-driven platform because the buyer has to accept the invoice on the TREADS platform, and all the commerce between the buyer and the seller are worked out on the platform. So it's a great digital platform. But why is it that all the PSUs have said, yes, we will register? So I can tell you they have all registered on the TREADS platform, but they're not doing business. Now, do you not think that is a serious sort of, I don't know, it's not a breach, but maybe something lower than a breach of corporate governance?
Yeah, of course.
So these large PSUs, and I'm singling out the PSUs because government has the power to make the PSUs come onto the platform. So they have all done that. The lip service has been done, but they're not doing business. Now separately, we know from a few cases, so BHEL was one case, not that I'm sort of batting for them, but it is one case where an MSME did say that they got the BHEL invoices at least within 60 days instead of 120 days or 180 days. So, this is very slow progress. We have to quicken the pace. And how we are going to do it, again, the digital platforms, according to me, are another excellent way of upping the ante and bringing in governance. Because every digital platform, as simple as GST. Now, what is GST really achieving, if you were to look at it from a fair and transparent financial statement, is that today we have the ability to recreate the financial statement virtually from the GST data of a small business entity.
Right.
So, you have, the minute they come onto GST, you have the ability to validate whether what they are projecting to the rest of the world, how
are you frightening them or are you warning them or what is that? But anyway, thanks so much for that. Well, one interesting comment Mr. Choudhary made in his opening remark was about the cost of compliance and governance. I happened to ask a friend of mine who's a company secretary. I said, okay, if we're a listed company, if I were to observe all the governance, regulations, compliance, how much does it cost me in terms of money? He roughly put it anywhere between 5 to 7 crores annually. Don't ask me, I have not verified through the audit and accounts function of Government of India. I would like to check that out. But there's another kind of cost, which perhaps Mr. Mariwala talked about in his statement, which he managed to overcome, which is a promoter entrepreneur, when he grows his own company, he's emotionally invested in it. And it's his baby or her baby. And when we talk about in corporate governance separation of chairman's role from chief executive's role and many other compliances, apart from the financial cost of governance, the MSME promoter, he or she asks himself or herself that I'm being alienated from my own creation. I'm losing control over what I have created and I've emotionally invested. Now, this prospect of too much of talk about governance that seem to take away my baby from me, how do you address that concern when you want the MSMEs to be more governance oriented? Either of you.
Yeah, so See, one of the best compliments when we want to praise somebody is, we normally say from the dais, he's not a man, he is now an institution, right? So that's a very common cliche. So the moment you want to become an institution, which essentially means that your structure will be more robust, your connections or connections with the different agent, economic agents or social agents becomes, there will be a social and political cost to it in terms of the scrutiny, in terms of assurances which people would demand. So another point which needs to be understood is that all of us are fallible. Nobody here is infallible. The moment you believe that we are fallible and there is something known as Johari window, you can't see many things, there are blind spots, then probably your ego or your say megalomania, that probably subsides. And when it subsides, then you start believing, yes, somebody else outside can think better than me, will have better knowledge, and will have a different perspective, which probably I am not looking at. And the entire struggle between subjectivity and objectivity, which is there around, this can be solved only when the management and the board get separated in some way or other. So you are an Arjun or you are a Duryodhan, but still you require somebody who is giving you Bidur advice, right? From that perspective, I think that the separation of the chairman and the managing director depends upon the level of your complexity of organization. So smaller organizations, they did not fear about all this talk because it is dependent upon their own risk appetite, plus affordability, and plus the level of their movement from individual to institution. So if you are in between, then probably it will require more control because your vision is infused in the entire operations. But the moment you have taken public money, and the moment, not only public money, the moment the consumer buys something from which you produce, you have a vicarious liability towards the consumers. So from that perspective, somebody separated from the management who can be giving a Bidur advice is desirable, but nothing to worry about it. It depends as you grow. So you will, as you grow in the organization, so from pant shirt you start having ties and suit, right? So similarly you will have situations where you would require a separate chairman and managing director.
Thank you. If you listen to Mr. Choudhary carefully, he gave you a second clue by using the expression Johari window that he looked after HR in SBI for some time, right? Am I correct? Mr. Ramann, is it frightening for small, medium entrepreneurs when you talk too much about governance?
Totally agree with your statement. They have no interest in separating any roles because they are running their business and they will continue to run it. That's the only way they know. And they know that it's successful and that will continue. But I think the point you raised, and this is again coming from the interactions I've had with so many of the MSMEs, the CA and the sort of investor. So, you know, you can invest at various stages. So private equity comes much later. But even if one were to look at, you know, at the seed stage, you have a lot of capital today in India just flowing in at early stages. Now, the angel does do something in the way we would look at corporate governance. So, the fact that there's an angel investor who has a different educational background, a different perspective of how business should run, I think we are bringing in willy-nilly a corporate governance structure within these entities. It's something which, you know, is probably not talked about. Maybe we should harp on it that much more. Maybe once again these, you know, investing bodies could be brought in as stakeholders to provide for that early governance structure. And the second is the role of the CA. Now, all these small businesses are completely dependent on their CA. One, for of course the number of accounts that they need to maintain, but two, for just the, you know, access to finance. It is the CA alone who ends up bringing finance to the promoters. So, and the CA is a regulated entity. Every CA actually is, you know, by oath supposed to do his job. And They are probably doing it. So again, it gives you a window of how to enter into the small businesses and bring in that CA as a mentor. In fact, they are doing that role practically. So, maybe we can sort of make it a more formalized role of the CA to bring in that level of corporate governance. So, the dependence of an individual, I'm saying it could just be a proprietorship, which does not really legally come under any kind of, corporate governance legal framework. But it's a good way to start.
Let me turn to another area. We all know that there are different platforms today that bring in learning and training products for independent directors, non-executive directors, executive search firms do it, Institute of Directors does it, Excellence Enablers does it, platforms like this create awareness. Do you think that these learning products that are there in the market today for independent directors, non-executive directors for their own development and learning, those products are adequate and would meet the needs or be relevant for promoters of MSME, or we need a different kind of a learning product to increase their awareness and their comfort and their ability to build better governance in their organization?
Yeah, so as we started this discussion, the size dependency. So the size decides about the different parameters, right? So when you are a small organization, maybe the corporate governance relations of transparency, maintaining good accounts, maintaining tax compliance, taking care of labor laws, those are some things which you require in a larger measure. But the moment you become big, so lot many nuances come. And so the body of knowledge for independent directors, for bigger, larger companies will be entirely different. For smaller companies, it will be different. So, it's a good scope. You have touched a very important point. The educators or the ed techs, for them it's a good scope. They can start a mini master class or maybe 6 hours, 3 hours online sessions just to see how the accounting systems play, and with say case studies is how finally the cost which is incurred in corporate governance helps them manage the long-term costs which impinge upon the particular firm. So this is a good scope, and I think people who would be interested in edtechs, they would start making such kinds of SASE programs for the individuals or for the companies which are still on the path of growth.
I love your analogy of a SASE program. Mr. Ramann?
No, I completely agree with what he's just said. I think, corporate governance 101 is really what we need to create and make it as simple and frankly give it free, because these guys are not going to pay for it.
Yeah.
They will start paying for something only when they realize that there's value in it, and that you can sort of bring in
from a State Bank of India, what
enablers excellence for that.
We were conceiving yesterday that we have a huge number of mudra borrowers, right? And they are the people, the micro borrowers, they are the people who probably will grow ahead. So why not maybe quarterly call 30-40 of them in our regional offices just to tell them something about corporate governance, something about accounting and taxation, because that is how we as big lenders also have a responsibility to train these people. So all of us can really create a concept of corporate governance, and as you said, it's free. So for those kinds of people, you require it free.
Fantastic. So, Mr. Damodaran, that could be another takeaway from today's session of yours, that whether it's no.
True.
I didn't come to the free part of it, but certainly certain educational program directed towards them could be done. But if I may, I don't mean to criticize, but if I may be politically incorrect, in the MSME Ministry Zone Objectives or SIDBI objectives, I don't recall having read promoting good governance in MSMEs as one of your objectives. Is that time has come to incorporate that into the charter?
A great point. I honestly don't have an answer because I need to go and reread the SIDBI Act, but MSME Ministry actually should take it up, and I'm happy I'll take it and place it before them, because under the new World Bank program called RAMP, they've got a lot of money for a lot of non-financial intervention. And I seriously think, you know, a corporate governance 101 could, you know, fit in very beautifully into what they're doing, because they have already got something called ZED, zero effect, zero defect.
Yeah,
now that does go along lines of, you know, non-financial assistance to the MSMEs. So I certainly feel that this is the right time for us to do it. And again, you know, let's not talk about that 9 crore. I think we're, you know, if we just target the fact that 1.4 crore GST entities that exist today in India, I think if we just address that particular sub-segment, we'll be doing a great service to the country.
And I think another idea you had raised that we perhaps didn't explore enough, maybe in your lending framework, can you build kind of structural incentivization that you can get 0.5% lower or whatever the following minimum governance practices you follow, without making it too complicated, or, you know, making a promise at least for the next 5 years you're not going to change that and not kind of let the bureaucracy grow. Maybe a good way of, you know, encouraging people to more think about it, and that would be a great thing that both of you as institutions can lead. But before I throw the floor open for questions, my last question to both of you. I'm a new entrepreneur, promoter, starry-eyed, aspiring and all of that. But before that, let me ask one other question, if I may. You know, on one side we find in India today this whole discussion about unicorn, decacorn, this, that and all, kind of God syndrome, people doing wonderful things. Alongside that, we find also that these new exciting organizations that are accounting failure, governance failure, some are collapsing, a promoter CEO being forced out or having to resign, both globally and in India, not just confined to India. What's the accountability of people like us, media and public? Are we over-deifying too much of adulation, or driving great expectation that is driving people to take shortcuts? And could we be perhaps a little more nuanced and responsible in our reaction to all of the success stories that we hear?
I think it's, if I can take, right? I think it is an existential question, because starting from all the philosophers who said that the human beings require a God, they invent a God. So if you, starting from Joseph Campbell, who wrote the 1,000 Faces of the Heroes, as a society, probably we have been fighting God since we were born. So that is why it was against the climate or against the situation in those times. We were hunters, then maybe as agriculture people or manufacturers. So in all times of society, society has always been defying and glorifying certain set of people who were trying to solve problems for the society. So some time back it was banking, IT, other consulting aspects. Now it is startups and things like that. So it's a human fallacy or a human, say, Shakespearean weakness of society that will always glorify people, make more noises about the achievements than actually they are, because this is the basic requirement for social growth, so that others also take a plunge and go for something like an adventure. Now, in this entire process, we need to understand that whether the failures on account of losing touch with the ground, taking shortcuts, whether that's a significant portion of the entire ecosystem or that's a part of weeding out of as a natural selection process. So my understanding is that there are far more people who are following the tenets of corporate governance, doing things right, than instances which often come into newspapers and who really disturb as a society, and it almost the psyche of the people is disturbed. So we will continue glorifying people who will find solutions for us, who will find a way to, say, inhabit Mars or Moon, right? We'll surely try to glorify
Only problem is, while inventing God, we'll end up with a lot of failed gods as well.
So we will always have failed gods, right? We will always fail God. So that is why corporate governance and watchdogs, like say Dr. Damodaran, he is spreading this particular instance and many more. So this watchdog will surely try to create doubts in these people that will be caught. So the time, space of finding the fault and pricking the bubble. It's a part of the total watchdog to minimize and collapse this time so that failed dogs don't make systemic damages. This is what my thought is.
So if I can just pick up from the God conversation and just mention that, I think...
they had a film called Gods Must Be Crazy, if you remember.
Of course. So I think if we sort of clamp down upon innovation as an highly innovative society, we would not have created 33,000 gods. So I'm a complete votary of doing whatever there is that must allow for innovation. And I think, whether we innovate on a software or create a new god, it's really an innovation. Somebody sees value in it. How that grows, that's really when we start bringing it into a sort of framework or applying the kind of, institutional frameworks that we would like to design. So, at a very base level, innovation cannot get stifled by too much of governance. I mean, that's really my personal view. The minute you start getting into public interest, stakeholder interest, I think a lot of corporate governance automatically has to kick in. So, if we are to, going back to the gale of creative destruction, that's really what the, world has seen. I'm not saying it's no longer the capitalist world as was defined 100 years ago, but that gale of creative destruction is really what we are all seeing play out repeatedly in every society across the world. So I think India certainly needs to go down that track much more deeply.
As long as good Indian parents that expect our children to score 100% in science and maths, we don't carry it to entrepreneurs as well when they start that they go to kind of build unicorns, all of them. So we got still 11 minutes, so I just want to throw platform open. Gentlemen there, please. If you could briefly introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. So one of the takeaways we just heard about the perception index for sustainability, correct? Just wondering, can we extend this perception logic even to governance from S to G? And what I'm trying to ask is, how do you assess potential failure of governance at an early stage? And one of the templates being used internationally is weak culture coupled with bad behavior at the top is a perfect recipe to assess that failure of governance is just going to be around the corner. So 3 questions. How do you vaccinate culture into an organization that it's in the DNA of every employee? How do you recruit a CEO who's completely aligned to your culture? And number 3, last, when there is a changeover of CEO, do you recommend again giving a booster shot so that culture is never eroded?
Well, I think if I may go first, I don't like the idea of vaccination of culture, because culture must evolve with time, and the good part of it must be preserved, the bad part should be shed, and we've got to have a culture of continuous learning. But I think your question is very valid. So
yeah, so one of the questions, I'll take the first question first. So, how do you say sort of assess early as to how the firm will fail? I think the touch point is that if there is accountability for actions within the organization which is visible to us, like say some bad purchases, bad acquisition, some tax compliance failure, and if the person who is responsible for this in the organization is negatively struck up to the level of firing, depending upon the level of deviation which has been done. If this culture of accountability is visible, then I think that I am assured that yes, this organization is not going to fail early. But if the permissiveness appears, like say somebody has to give a stock statement to me every month or quarterly, depending upon the size of the loan, if I get that on the first of every quarter or every month with all the data, the quantity, the price, etc., properly say written, I find that the company is not going to fail, provided it has also to be vetted by my person going there and seeing some of the invoices. But if my stock statement doesn't come to me or my financial report doesn't come to me at the required time, and the accountant of that particular firm remains the same, even with infractions for 3 months, 6 months, I believe that there could be serious accountability in issues in the company, and I need to take a stock. I need to take stock of the assumptions when I underwrote that loan. As far as vaccination is concerned, yes, we all need vaccinations. No? That is why we often go to temples. We often listen to somebody spiritual, Isa Yoga or somebody we listen, just to keep ourselves in shape mentally and be kind of vaccinated most of the time because all of us have eternal issue of making choices all the time. And at that particular point of time, if you have a compass ready, then it's easier to navigate in the world. So that is why you need inoculation or say vaccination. I will just differ from you on this particular aspect. And the third point, that whenever there is a change in CEO, it's a pure change, because the CEO will decide the culture again, who he favors, what he likes, what he is going to promote. Now at that point of time, it is for the board or the company or owners of the company to again go through that rigor and that kind of session. So on these aspects, these are my views, and you can
Mr.
also
Ramann,
add.
quick answer on early warning system.
I completely agree that vaccination is not a way forward. You cannot impose anything on any business society. Even social society does not like such impositions. So it really has got to be aligning what you desire as an outcome with the behavior of the people. So it goes back to regulation. Governance is nothing but sort of sub-segment of regulation, and regulation, as we all know, Mr. Damodaran sort of taught us that do not use the big stick all the time. You don't need to hit hard every time, because then your hitting hard is also going to lose value. So it's about incentivizing the behavior. I don't think there's anybody called a bad entrepreneur or bad promoter. It's what they understand in their business culture of what can make more money. So you have to bring in financial incentives. I still remember algo trading in 2008 when Mr. Damodaran had left SEBI was just about coming in. It was barely talked about. And in 2010 or thereabouts, it had infiltrated the system, and we brought in a economic penalty or a financial penalty if you did too many orders against the number of trades that came out. So there was an order to trade ratio. Now that was our understanding of incentivizing the system to not have too many unnecessary orders going out. But today, even that has completely changed. In 10 years, you have only algo trading happening. So, I think you have to bring in financial incentives into whatever system that you're trying to regulate.
And I think to add to both of their points, I believe the lenders have the role of a coach and a counselor to new entrepreneurs in terms of instilling a sense of discipline, because I think those are the early warning systems. As lenders, you start getting, as you mentioned, whether accounts are closed and the reports are submitted and you come back to pay on time or at least communicate. I think a lot of those telltale signs could be there. Any other question? Yes, please. Sir, here. After that, you, please. Yeah. Let's keep the answers brief so that we can stick to the time. Thank you.
I'm Suneet Maheshwari. Just a question that you talked about, Mr. Ramann, about incentivizing, and I think a lot of actions or a desire to follow a particular path comes from either a stick or some kind of an incentive, and your suggestion of giving some kind of an interest rebate for good governance seems to be an excellent idea. However, just two issues that if I put on a risk hat, the whole sector would probably command a slightly higher risk spread need. And unless you have a recourse on your liability side of getting some benefit, which then you can pass on, how do you, and it's not just SIDBI. SIDBI probably could have an access through some facility from the government, but the entire community that is lending to SME, unless they have something corresponding on their liability side, this is not going to sort of percolate to everybody else. And unless it percolates to everybody else, this culture which you're talking about will take a little more longer to effect. Just.
I completely agree. It's not going to happen overnight. There is a journey that we have to traverse. But the fact is that there is already a well-known risk premium for SME. It exists. I would say it's 6%. He might, in his larger experience, say it's 4%. But the premium on lending to SME already exists. And I would say it is a governance premium. That risk is nearly entirely because we do not know what is happening within that small entity, because there is nothing called an independent director. There's probably, an audit account which is by a CA of what we think is not great repute. So all this is already available in the system. It can be measured. And I think your point is very right. We need to attack that governance premium which is there today in the banking sector and see how to, sort of whittle it down. That's really our challenge as bankers.
Thanks. Quick last question, please, because we got 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Yes, please.
Yes, so good afternoon. I think we have made a perfect case of encouraging corporate governance amongst MSMEs rather than enforcing it. So from a regulatory perspective, what would be your view that when corporate governance principles are framed for MSMEs, then rather than implementing it through the punitive eye, if we regulate them through a comply or an explain basis, that would kind of bring them out of actually explaining why they are not, I wouldn't say reluctant, but why they are not in a position to put in the systems.
Quick response, Mr. Choudhary.
I think we started with this only. So just to kind of keep them comfortable in this journey of corporate governance, it is necessary that we also codify a bit corporate governance for MSMEs, because as of now we don't have any codification as such. So we can have simpler terms, diluted compliances, etc. And in this process, maybe all of us who are sitting over here and the corporate governance ecosystem, we require to coach, we require to comfort, we require to voluntarily help them in this journey. And in this process, if the costs are low and if there are people around who will support you in your journey, then almost everybody wants to be on the right side of law. So this is what a small response I have.
Maybe today we may not have time to explore that more, whether an issue could be another time to discuss perhaps is like the credit rating. Could there be a governance rating that could give a kind of like energy efficiency? Today you have in air conditioners, refrigerators.
That's right.
Whether you could have a governance efficiency star rating for MSMEs of some kind, self-governance, reporting, self-assessment, There could be many mechanisms that we can evolve, but as my panelists very rightly earlier said, it all depends on, at the end of the day, individual value system, standards, role modeling examples that we set. And with that, I thank both my panelists for making it so lively, wonderful, informative, and thank you all. You've been a wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Misra, Mr. Ramann, and Mr. Choudhary for that beautiful insights that you've been able to share with us. If I could request Mr. Bharat Doshi, former Group CFO Mahindra & Mahindra, and the former Director, the Central Board of RBI, to please come up and present small tokens of appreciation to our panelists, sir.
For the public sector enterprises,
Which is, I just went.
So we've got caricatures of our panelists done by artists who are seated inside the hall. You also have within the individual bags certificates stating that 10 trees have been planted in your names in the Sundarbans. Your contribution to keep and conserve our environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are taking a break now for tea and refreshments outside the hall. Please be back here in about 10 minutes. We'll be ready to start our next session. So thank you very much.